американський Яна посередині. Так, що, по-моєму, на такі всі сильні. Лідера процесу немає.
Колеги, добрий день. Дякую всім, хто сьогодні.
Good afternoon. Thank you for everyone who's with us. Today we'll be talking about subsidies and about the energy subsidies, about the money that the state is using to help people who cannot pay. There are problems with that. Here's a picture that demonstrates why subsidies need monetization, talking about the previous heating season. In blue, there is number of people who were receiving subsidies, in yellow those who do not receive subsidies. And those who do not receive subsidies, another figures, 61% of meters we have. We don't know where the subsidies go, and here the question is how to do it so that the state assistance is more efficient. Can we monetize these subsidies, and can we start doing it this season? We have the representatives of DiXi Group, Naftagaz, Social Policy, and the head of the National Commission on Regulating the Services. The first one will be Taras, the analyst of DiXi Group. Greetings to everyone. Thank you for coming. The question is very topical because it concerns the users of subsidies, receivers of subsidies, and those who pay for them. All the participants of the process are interested in how to make subsidies maximum effective. What is meant? First of all, we see here on the screen people who receive subsidies and who have no opportunity to use those that they save, are not interested in saving resources. That means burning money from the budget, and these figures are huge. There are about 7 million people or families that receive subsidies. So how to make it so that the subsidies are efficient, so that the use and the spending of resources is efficient. And the solution to that could be monetization. If a person can get the money, then the person will be interested in using energy resources more efficiently. The only question is monetization of subsidies should be done according to the model, which will answer three major questions. First, how can this model be maximum useful for consumers? How should the consumers be interested in that? The second one is control of how the money is spent, because we understand that there might be certain schemes found which on paper will show that we do have energy-saving technologies, but in fact this is not the case. And third is control over how monetization of these subsidies in a year reduced the consumption of resources by those who are receiving subsidies, how optimal the consumption became, and how much the budget expenditures were reduced. If we look at the European best practices, monetization is not very popular in Europe. There's an example of Portugal, and for those who receive subsidies, they reduce the tariff for consumption of 500 cubic meters of gas per year. Plus, there is additional subsidy, social, but in total, that's not more than 30% of the tariff. So monetization is what is characteristic for the post-Soviet countries, and that is because in those countries people were not thinking about saving resources, and people are not used to saving resources. We're just starting to do it, and the stimuli for people to understand how important it is to save resources, not just for them, but for the whole country. That is the major task. Monetization in our case is needed, but we need to understand what model of monetization we should select. Thank you, Taras. We will try to discuss it to see all the pros and contras of what is discussed, and I welcome two new panelists. And before, I would like to ask Vitaly Muzyczenko from the Ministry of Social Policy. There was a lot mentioned about risks of monetization, how this money will be used. What is the position of the ministry on that? Let us start from the beginning. Why the system of subsidies was designed and how it influences the population. First of all, the subsidy system was designed to provide possibility to those citizens, to those families who cannot individually pay for the necessary volume of energy resources or for utilities in general, because this is the mandatory survival package. Without gas or heating, it is impossible to survive in winter time. That is why we have the system of subsidies in the country. It has been in place for 20 years. It has been adapting to the challenges, but we can clearly say that 3 years ago, that was the system that covered mostly vulnerable population. That was 70% of the population in the country, 7 or 8%, and that was the normal European model, when up to 10% of the population require state support. Now the system of subsidies is a much wider program. We're not saying that's the program for the least protected population. That is the buffer that allows the citizens in the period when the tariffs are went up very drastically, but the income of the population reduced. So during this period of time, the system of subsidies gives the possibility for citizens to pay for the communal services, and this program has the elements which stimulates the population to save energy. When we saw the slide which showed that those who receive subsidies, they are consuming more natural gas, we cannot say that the citizens who are individually paying for their natural gas Without subsidies, we cannot say that they ensure comfortable conditions for their family, because to save, two options are possible: mechanically consume mechanically reduce the consumption, but with that the comfort is deteriorating and the health is deteriorating. But when the state guarantees that there will be a certain volume of consumption provided, that was for people to ensure comfortable conditions for themselves. But in the last heating period, the citizens who receive subsidies, they still save, because we know that a certain amount of money was returned back to the state budget, and the social norms were adjusted based on that. Today, the program of subsidies has coped with its main task. It covered 6.5 million families, and it requires further development. We need to understand what should this program be in 3-5 years, because it's a abnormal situation when more than half of the population will receive subsidies in 3 years. And for that we have several options to increase the incomes of the population. We see that certain things are made here to increase the minimum wage, and any payment for any work should be increased. And the next step is the pension reform. This way, part of the citizens will be able to individually pay for communal services. Some citizens will stay with the program of housing subsidies, and for that category of citizens, we need to think of the model which will be operating in the future. One of the possible options is monetization, but there are two aspects of implementing monetization, and that is at the level of the companies to simplify the mechanism of functioning of subsidies, and another option is at the level of consumption, of consumers. The ministry does not see in the nearest perspective the opportunity to monetize all the subsidies. Even if we think about opening 7 million personal accounts to pay subsidies to, that process can last for half a year or a year. And also the system of the social security bodies is not really ready for monetization, because that means human resources, software, and we need to resolve all these issues before we switch to full-fledged monetization. But at the same time, implementing some mechanisms of monetization is the correct one. And the first option, that is monetization of the balance. We are working on that now, but you need to understand that the main thing is the readiness of the system to implement a certain mechanism. Thank you.
National Commission on Energy Regulations. Previously, you mentioned that we will have one of the options in December on partial monetization. The Commission, you know that the incomes, the profits are low in the country, and I participate a lot in the meetings like this, together with the representatives of other branches of power, in order to bring these tariffs up to the market level. These were the individual subsidies, then they corrected social norms, and we provided all the analytical data, and the consumption is lower, and this optimized the need in funding, and we believe that we should move forward. So for this heating season, there were two major challenges. We should remind people about subsidies in order that those who didn't get it, that they should apply for the subsidy. And I believe that the government succeeded in accomplishing this task. The number of people who get subsidies that get the subsidies, they are at the level that what was forecast, and not later than the end of December, there should be announced the possibility to monetize the balance at the end of heating season. That would be a good stimulus for the citizens to save. And technically, I cannot say it for sure, but in my opinion, that is what can be done. And for this, there is possibility to get resources, and there is time to accomplish this until April. The second area, citizens should have some terms in order to optimize subsidies and to motivate people to energy saving. And the next heating season, the social norms will be not 5 and 5 meters, but less. And then citizens will understand that they should save and they should be energy efficient. And one more area Muzichenko mentioned is monetization at the level of industries. And this can be done now, but we can face the problem here that we observe with timely payments of these subsidies. So we should not hide problems. We should reveal them and we should resolve them. The same was with metering. 20 years ago at the level of the ministry, and there was no motivation because they knew that their losses are big. That's why they didn't want to deal with it. This is wrong. There should be proper investment, and depreciation should be calculated, and there should be fair calculation for the citizens. And we as Commission will help in this work in order to carry out monetization at the level of enterprises. Secondly, to monetize the balance at the end of this year, and also to work in order that energy efficiency measures were must have, must do, because there are long-term plans and the proposals for the citizens how to do this. And we will defend the interests of licenses if there won't be payment, and because there are many problems with timeliness of payments, and this is a warning sign, and we want to respond on this properly. Thank you. And now I give the floor to Yana Bukhrimova, Head of Project Office for Reforms of the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine. There were some discussions at the level of Ministry of Finance, and the readiness of services was discussed, and also the availability of money for this. A month passed after this decision was taken, and the model is not ready. The situation is at the same level. The discussions are on the way, and the goal is to take decision on final model till this year or the beginning of the next year, because if this decision to introduce some mechanisms of monetization this year, after the heating season, that should be done, and that should be announced. Otherwise, it won't be possible. If you want people to save, you should announce this. What I would like to say, I would like to go several steps back. After the discussion that we had months ago, and also it continued, and several participants raised the question that we deal with now. And when we are speaking about monetization, everyone understands this differently. Monetization at the level of supplier and monetization at the level of population. But when we are speaking about monetization at the level of citizens, the question is raised. The participant asked me, you said that monetization, that subsidy should have the function of social function and also function of saving. And he said that this is wrong. And he asked a philosophical question, and I do not agree with him. But if you answer this question, there won't be any questions about monetization at the level of citizens. Because if we believe that the subsidy is social, so we do not need the monetization at the level of citizens. So budget pays for them and not by clearing, but it will be enough if we look at this like in this way. And if we are saying that the subsidy has one more function, this is the function of stimulating to save. This is monetization at the level of citizens, because only having resources such as money, the population will be interested in saving money. So these are not just figures on paper. It will be more efficient if people get money in their hands. So the subsidies, they should be social, stimulating to saving. And it should be stimulating for energy efficiency, and there should be a monetization at the level of citizens. Maybe other participants have other ideas on this. So how and then? Everyone agrees that the monetization at the level of enterprises is important. This is not monetization, it's just going to we should abolish legislative acts concerning clearance in this area. So we should change the system. Of course, many issues will arise, but clearance is not better than money payments. Of course, this carries some risks with discipline and payments, but this step should be made. And how to lower the risks? Yes, this is the question, especially because some special accounts will be cancelled, and maybe there will be some issues with discipline, and this cancellation of clearance should be done. It should be discussed how it should be done. About monetization at the level of citizens, I'm skeptical about it. It is impossible to introduce it in full form in 2017. Technically, the system is not ready, and Vitaly told us about it. To open 7 million accounts, it's difficult, a technical decision, and we should understand what it will be, and we should have time for implementation. Second, the norms. Today, the norms they do not correspond, so they should be reviewed. And in order to do this, we should have information about real consumption. And in the Cabinet of Ministers, now there is an initiative, and it should be adopted this week, about introduction of system of monitoring on factual consumption in order to have information about real consumption and the norms that should be established. Also, there is draft on of international institutions that want to help us together. First, we need the information about consumption, real consumption, and to establish the norms in accordance with real consumption. And about monetization of subsidies, this is not popular. This should be cancelled if payments are not made properly. So if people pay with delay or they do not pay, so this is concerning this model. And also the meters at the level of 3 months ago, this was 40%. Now they say it is higher. And now they say it is 61%. And about monetization of balance, this is a good idea. But I have some doubts. I was always proponent of monetization of balance, but we had 15 billion of balance, and this year this is not the case. So these 15 billion were because of inadequate norms. If we recognize that the norms are not efficient, so the issue arises about efficiency of the use of resources. So based on these norms, we just provide this to the population without any consideration of these norms. So maybe so there are some problems with this. So about technology, about methods of implementation. So, for example, we pay tax 10% in money, and not clearing, but we pay 10%. That will be beneficial, but it can be compromised, because if we do not show to the enterprises in what way they provide the money to people, so they just supply resources, they do not distribute money, and there the account should be opened. And in what way can it be done? So if there is a right and the mechanism is not established, how this right is realized, it can lead to conflicts, and we will get opposite results. That's why if we introduce the monetization of balance, so we should make in correspondence with the regulations, and that should be done properly. Maybe that is all. If the monetization of balances is needed, so there should be monetization in the at the end of the system is possible. At the level, if at the level of state, they will, if they provide technical decision on how to do this. Do you have a comment? Unfortunately, the interest in the to that issue is raised when the heating season is started. So no one takes care about this in other seasons. So in the majority of resources, we have the basis to calculate average consumption. And at the beginning of this year, we introduced the initiative that is in the majority of European regulations. So this is in English, typical domestic consumption volumes, and we published these figures at the beginning of 2016, and this was the basis for the decision of the Cabinet of Ministers to establish the subsidies. So there is a potential for reduction if we will stimulate people to energy efficiency. So this issue of norms, there is a grip on the volumes. And I see that during 1.5 years, the government, they deal with these issues as they believe that this issue is difficult, and they do not see how to do it step by step. And so if we do it step by step, this issue will be easily resolved. And if we speak about natural gas, it is easy to do this at the end of the season. Just we should look at the meters and take data from them. And also about heating, we can calculate it by the in accordance to the with the data provided by the meters, and also the opening of the account. We should take decision to make the plan and to announce and to implement it.
Now, Tetyana Boyko, OPORA network that communicates to activists in the regions. But I would like Alexei to be the first one. Alexei Khabatyuk, Naftogaz, Ukraine. First of all, I would like to say that for Naftogaz, and this is not a specific function, this discussion about subsidies, but because we have the functions and special responsibility to supply gas to the population of Ukraine, we are in this system. And I would like to say that we are absolutely for monetization, switching to monetary settlements, switching to gas market, all the reforms which were launched in the gas market with the assistance of the regulator, of the cabinet of ministers, with the participation of Naftogaz, we want it to be completed. Now, as to monetization, first of all, I would like to agree with Vitaly and Dmytro. Yes, these external factors are of importance, but let them be external, because the system of subsidies, they only indirectly influence the system of subsidies. As to monetization, the forms of monetization, we are for monetization of consumers at the level of consumers. When it is at the level of utilities or the gas suppliers, then we see non-specific function for suppliers of so-called monetization of the balance to pay to final consumers. They are not financial institutions and so on. On the other hand, there's a certain conflict of interests, and there is a problem of excessive liquidity at the level of utilities, because in a case of higher or lower norms, the excessive funding will be coming to the accounts of the suppliers, and they will stay at these accounts. We see more reasonable switching to monetization at the level of consumers. And the main function for us is the function of ensuring reliability, which is based on conflict of interest, because the consumer has an interest to receive maximum money from subsidies, maximum cash, and that is the conflict with the interests of the supplier, who wants this money to be used for the resource that they supply. And this way, the situation at the lower level is usually regulated. When different parties are interested in different things, then the balance could be achieved. But we do not expect that this monetization will happen this heating season, because we don't see today any readiness of the legislative basis, the readiness of all participants to such a quick implementation, because the hearing season has in 2 months will be over, but a lot has started 2 months ago, and a lot was spent within these 2 months, which were quite warm compared to the rest. The reserves could be formed during the first and the last 2 months. Yes, we can save, but the next 3 months, because of weather conditions, when the temperature is lower than the average seasonal, then the consumption of gas will be very high, and it could be at the level of social norms. I understand what the regulator did, and we're using their data as to monitoring for 2015. We also send our proposals to different bodies, because the real consumption by consumers of the heating in 2015 was at the level of 4 cubic meters per square meter of the housing, and today it's 5.5 cubic meters. So we do have certain reserves that Dmytro mentioned, but there is another element of the system of subsidies, and that is monitoring and verification, and there are different aspects here. That is refers to the to what the subsidy, towards what the subsidy is targeted. We understand that the main function was to create the buffer for the population, but in the future this system of verification and exclusion, elimination of the fraud or any other illegal actions should be tougher, and the approach should be more clearly drafted in the regulations, because now there are certain territorial commissions that can allocate the subsidies which are above the norms set by the Cabinet of Ministers. I absolutely support Dmytro in specific plans, specific proposals from which we need to start our work, because we waste time for just discussions, and the better is the enemy of good. And if we are trying to achieve better, we can lose a lot of time and a lot of resources. So the amount which is allocated for the next year for utilities could even grow more. Tetyana Boyko and then Marianna Onufryk. And then the questions from the audience. I know that you prepared some proposals. From the proposals that have been developed, can anything be used? Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to say that I'm happy that finally we are talking about monetization of subsidies. The government is discussing it last week at the meeting with the Prime Minister. He said that that's his third priority, the third among the 8 priorities of the Prime Minister. We were talking about the working group. I cannot understand who's the leader of the process there, because I believe that the Minister of Finance should be the leader, and it should be clear who is there, who are part of that, and what are their roles, because it is important. And this is the issue that the donors are looking at. I am sure that the monetization of subsidies is one of the IMF and World Bank criteria. I was in Washington, D.C. at the meeting of the governmental delegation, and they were discussing the issue of transparency in energy sector and setting up anti-corruption institutions. And I believe that the key issue here is that we will be moving in this direction. All understand that full monetization at the level of population is impossible, and we need to have a step-by-step plan. And I agree that what could be done this heating season, verification is needed, the single base of those who receive subsidies, and we need additional criteria, not just the aggregated income. There are houses where poor people cannot live, but there are some of those who receive subsidies, and they drive Mercedes cars. Then monetization of the balance. I see no technical problem with opening accounts. And then gradual reduction of social norms, because as of today they are too high. But we as experts, we are concentrated on one issue. And I would like to talk now about housing subsidies. We have subsidies for communal services, but I would like to mention compensation of expenditures for management of houses, residential houses. This is our big problem. That is not about clearing. That's the payment that ZECs received today, and these are in the form of payment for the service for management or compensation of expenditures for management in case the management is done by the condominiums. And these subsidies, they are returned later in time. If the delay is 3 months, they do not even consider it to be a delay. Usually it's 3 or 6 months, and the biggest problem for the condominiums is that the money is not compensated in timely manner. And my question is to the Ministry of Finance. Why does it happen? We understand why this delay is happening today. We understand why it is so big. And what happens if we make a decision to switch to monetization? Will this issue be addressed? And my proposal is, in this heating season, to make monetization of housing subsidies, compensation of expenditures for management in condominium, because otherwise we will not be able to launch the market of management of the housing fund. The private business managers will not go to that system of calculations. I believe that this is absolutely realistic to do it. That's a philosophical question. Maybe I'm not the correct person here to answer these questions because I'm not responsible for the budget. The classical problems in Ukraine, we always lack money when forming the budget, when executing the budget. And the issue of delay, yes, this takes place. But why? That's a philosophical question. The allocation of money from the budget depends on whether there's money in the budget. That's answer to the question. As to management, do you suggest to separate just that part? Unfortunately, the comment is not heard. We do not hear the comment. We need to consider that. because we never consider that separately.
Окей, ще одне питання підвисло в повітрі. Дякую. І пані Мар'ян.
And Marianna Onufryk. One more question I would like you to mention. Paternalism and attitude to subsidies. The system which is being discussed will force people to refuse from subsidies. If the money is not used for energy efficiency, they will have to pay full price. But people refuse from bigger salaries, official bigger salaries, because then they will not be able to receive subsidies. Yes, this is very important issue, because during 25 years we failed to overcome that problem. And unlike the declarations, I examined all the concept strategies of reforming social sphere, economic sphere, and all the governments starting from Kinach, where they have been declaring that we need to monetize privileges, to say nothing about the accumulation system. But unfortunately, those who receive subsidies is just expanding. The number of those is going up, and that just deepens the crisis and does not allow people, and there are no incentives for people to take responsibility for their life and in just everyday life and in economic life. And we need to monetize subsidies. When we say that subsidies are instrument of social protection of the population, this is the instrument which is effective today. It is the instrument which is used for a wide range of people who abuse this instrument, and non-efficiency of that makes it possible to deepen shadowing the salaries, because people don't want to receive big official salaries. And it also enters some other spheres, like employment sector. When people go to employment centers, declaring that they are unemployed in order to receive assistance. But today, everyone agrees that we do need monetization. There are different mechanisms and terms of achieving this monetization, but we need to start making certain steps. We would like to discuss a certain concept or strategy, because we can look for different challenges and risks. But let's take the pension reform. Everyone's saying that we do need it, but we again then are talking about risks and challenges. And I would like to say a few words about opening accounts. This is a technical solution. Somehow I was surprised that we need to open 7 or 8 million accounts. I talked to representatives of the banking sector, and they say that's not a problem for banks to open accounts. First of all, because most of those who receive subsidies, they receive some other type of social assistance from the state, and they have their accounts in a shut bank. They have pensions or social assistance for disability or something else. There are those social accounts. And then talking to specialists, they're saying that's not a problem now to make targeted money when it's separated, that this is a social assistance for disability, and there is part which people cannot withdraw in cash, but can transfer as payment for a subsidy. Then there are some other options And if a person doesn't have an account, the account is open. If we start doing it now, if now start this process, then we will not need 2-3 years for that. I also agree that a lot is to be done. Many actions are to be done in the sphere of social protection. We were talking about verification, that's important. Last week I talked to Andriy who's leaving his position now. Who's that? And the head of the Department of the Ministry of Finance on verification. He's working on verification of social payments. He wrote on Facebook that because of different reasons, I will not comment that. But we discussed at the level of department. They had the draft amendments to the resolution on subsidies, which had all these mechanisms. When people, if they have some real estate or several cars, according to the legislation, they can receive subsidies because even deposits are not considered as your income. And that draft resolution was ready. He talked with me, with other specialists to introduce it in the sphere of subsidies.
Реальні кроки, реальний документ, реальні рішення, реальні проекти.
And in fact, there is the agreement between of everyone all understand the risks. Let's start working. But the question is whether the representatives of the banking sector were invited. I know that Andriy is present at the sittings of the government. Were they invited to discuss whether that's a problem? Do you have any answers? You mentioned that problem. A comment to that information. It's good when from the theoretical point of view we are planning things, but we need to understand how practically this could be implemented. When we are saying that a banker should be doing it, but we need to understand that 6.5 million families already are receiving families and they will not come back. And several million of them have open accounts in the Shad Bank. Paying different subsidies happens either via banking institutions, via different banks to administer the system of cash payments to the population. We need to open accounts in one of the banks, not in all the banks which exist. Why in one? Why cannot you do it in several? If you do not trust private, then in state banks. It's about not trust. It's not about trust, but about administering. Today, when paying money, we need to understand where this money will go, and also the subsidy guarantees that the receiver of the subsidy has no debt for paying communal services, because in another case the subsidy will stop. If we give away this money, the person without any fines can use it as a free credit resource for some other needs, not to pay communal services. Okay, we're talking about theoretical things. We know of many issues which are to be resolved, but next discussion should be about a very specific document, and then we will be able to say what will work, what will not. Thank you for your presentations. Any questions from the audience? Please take the microphone.
Good afternoon. Alexander Stetsenko. I'm the representative of business. We communicate with mayors and the directors of energy enterprises to establish boilers with the use of renewable resources, and the enterprises heads, they say that they understand the work with gas, with such energy supply. So Teplokомуненерго, how can we monetize this subsidies? And also the same with payments. For example, I buy biomass for money, then I supply to Teplokомуненерго, but they do not have money. How can they make payments? And if I use Teplokомуненерго to supply resources to consumers, how this can be monetized? As I understood the question, this question maybe I will answer this question. So we are speaking about the monetization at the level of enterprises, and it will help to solve the problems of delay in payments, and clearance has its drawbacks, and everyone knows about it. And I believe that till the end of this year, there should be announcement of monetization of balance, and to monetize it on at the level of enterprises and to announce it. So you should work with budget sphere and with other consumers, excluded population. I supply the heat for to Teplokомуненерго. I sell it to Teplokомуненерго. So if I put the boiler, but they resell my heat I supply to population, 80% of consumers are population. In what way can I sell heat to them? When you started your business, maybe you knew that payments are made by provisions of the government. That's why you should ask this question to those who created Provision 20, the Ministry of Finance. So you can ask it this question, the Ministry of Finance. The monetization is resolved by cancellation of Provision 20. We have other provision that regulate this relation. So this is the matter of one political decision. If we want to reveal all these problems, this is the. So I believe that this can be solved if there is will for this. And the Ministry of Social Policy can say whether this is the matter of cancellation of one provision. When we are speaking about the mechanism, the financing is done by several ways, and as of today, I know that heads of Ministry of Regions and they support the producers of renewable energy, and they believe that rules should be established that Teplokомуненерго would be able to pay such producers. But the main regulator should establish what part of payment is done by clearance and what part of payment is monetized. So this shift to monetization will simplify the situation. So there will be rules established on this, and the money goes through the certain stages and goes to the organization that is that should get this money. So now we know that the social so we are proponents of simplification of this mechanism. Sidorenko Dmytro, Union Agency. First question about how to stimulate the citizens to save energy. So if people consume less, then they will say that they will consume less, and then maybe they will be afraid that this norm will be reduced further. And how to convince people to save, for example, how to save gas, and how can the citizens save if we are speaking about individual houses, and how can they save if we are speaking about multi-storied houses, multi-flats houses. So if we are speaking about long-term prospect, we should announce the reduction of the norm of national gas and on energy. So 7, 5, and 5, and next season and one more season we can announce what it will be. As to multi-flat, multi-storied houses, you can save together, because this is in the interest of all the residents of the house to save. The saving can be if there are meters established, and the resident who gets subsidy will have money in order to pay to contribute to warm up the house, and he can resolve his individual issues, or if he is the member of the condominium, they can do it jointly. So the majority of subsidies are for natural gas, and we should do this step because it is more evident, and individual consumer knows what he can do. So there is such an option how to make this. We can have, for example, a person can pay for communal services with this money, or to spend it on energy efficiency. All this balance should have a clear target, for example, only for energy efficiency measures. If we're speaking about multi-flat houses, so there should be condominium created, because at the level of flats you can only establish meters or replace windows. And the balance, whether we can spend them for energy efficiency. Of course, we are for the introduction of energy efficiency measures, but at the same time, we should take into account the different categories of users. They have different priorities, and some of them introduced some measures, and they have limitations on further saving. So in our opinion, and our proposal that we submitted during a lot of time, to introduce long-term schedule to reduce social norms, that consumers will take decision based on this, whether they will introduce measures, or maybe they have introduced such measures. So in the next period, they will he will get what he this will be their own individual choice. So you know that our government, it never happened that our government survived such long periods. So we hope that we will have our next meeting, and we hope that we will have some proposals from vice premiers, and that we will discuss the document next time.